You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 24th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio.
The EU-China summit in Beijing, where everyone is barely pretending they're happy to be. Another round of talks on Gaza in Rome, where barely anyone is pretending they're trying. And would you work a 72-hour week every week? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Daniela Peled and Robin Brandt will discuss the day's big stories, and our regular letter comes from Washington, D.C. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Daniela Peled, Managing Editor of the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, and by Robin Brandt, former BBC presenter and correspondent in China and the United States. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Daniela, you are, as listeners will know by now, I think, prone to somewhat obscurantist travel to places where you think there will be a rich bounty of local history museums, and your sights have been turned upon. We don't really have a drum roll sound effect, but Ipswich.
Ipswich is my next destination. I am planning 2 nights in the Premier Inn, which is like I think probably the Ipswich's premier.
Daniela, people in Ipswich may be listening to this. If you don't want to be met at the city limits by an angry mob with torches and pitchforks, I would watch your tone.
Oh, but I think you're just playing into the stereotype of people from Ipswich there, so that's equally offensive.
Yeah, but I'm not planning to go.
Good point. Yeah, I'm planning to go to all of the Ipswich local history museums. Perhaps I'll frolic a bit in Sutton Hoo. Maybe go down the road to Kentwell Hall. The more obscure, the better. This is my summer jaunt, so I'm looking forward to it very much.
If any of our listeners are, in fact, proprietors of local history museums in Ipswich,
the surrounding area,
or the surrounding area, do please get in touch. We will direct you towards Daniela, or vice versa. Robin, you for your summer holidays are going somewhere, as I understand it, slightly less imaginative, if arguably warmer.
Yeah, although we often holiday on the Essex coast, I might add, in defence of our own homeland. No, I'm off to Greece, to the Peloponnese. The first time I've been to the mainland for a family holiday. We can't wait. We're clawing our way towards the middle of August and a nice 2-week break. I won't mention where it is because I don't want anyone coming on board and spoiling it.
I want to go back to the Essex coast thing as a holiday destination, though. Which part of it in particular?
Walton-on-the-Naze, just up from Clacton. I'm a North Londoner. My family historically have always holidayed in that part of the world. It's got a great little bit of... It's beautiful in terms of the coastline. Essex is a very rural county. We've been talking about Manningtree. It's kind of past in that part of estuary England as well. And, I sound like I'm from the Walton tourist board here. For a short break, it's the best place to go.
If anybody from the Walton Tourist Board is listening and would like to engage in some sort of sponsorship arrangement with the programme, or perhaps just with Robin, do please also drop us a line. We will begin in Beijing, which is hosting a semi-commemorative... Who on earth would put a phrase like that in a radio script? Let's have another go at that. Semi-commemorative summit, noting 50 years of diplomatic ties between the People's Republic and the European Union, which might nevertheless be short on cheery toasts, hearty backslapping and general bonhomie. Chinese President Xi Jinping described the relationship as mutually beneficial, the approximate diplomatic equivalent of writing best wishes on a birthday card, while European Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen said she believed the relationship had reached an inflection point and required rebalancing. Phrases which some listeners may associate with the moments immediately before their possessions were flung from an upstairs window. Robin, how jolly an occasion does this sound?
Well, look, I think what they're trying to do is find a bottom to the current very difficult relationship, frankly, in an effort to ensure both between Brussels and Beijing that it frankly just doesn't get any worse. So what was supposed to be a 2-day event is now a 1-day event. There will be no communique. They're struggling to find common ground, as is very often the case. It's legitimate, but nonetheless, it tells you how difficult relations are. The only common ground they can really seem to find is ongoing and increased cooperation when it comes to climate change. That's often something Keir Starmer in the UK talks about. That's often something that former President Joe Biden would talk about. That's the one thing in which many nations, many countries do want to and can find common ground with China as the world's biggest polluter and as the world's also biggest generator of sustainable energy and all the hardware that goes with it. So, look, this is a relationship that has really got increasingly far more fractious in recent years. Ursula von der Leyen used to talk years ago about de-risking the EU's economies from supply chain threats of China. They've even moved beyond that language now. Now it's about trying to rebalance. But the problem for Brussels and the European Union as a whole, as China tries to pick off some of the more favourable member nations like Serbia, is that it finds itself between Trump 2.0 and it finds itself between a fairly assertive Chinese government, actually, that has control of rare earth minerals and many other things that are absolutely crucial to the global economy, and is chosen to be fairly assertive, fairly bold, fairly confident in the way it deals with Donald Trump's threats and increasingly with its trading relationship with the European Union.
Because, Daniela, everybody attending this does understand, surely, that an amount of this is baked in. There is no way at all, is there, that there couldn't be tension or would be no tension between the European Union and China. They're quite different setups.
To put it mildly, I think their aims and expectations and hopes and dreams are very different, and I think where the Europeans are thinking they could have some leverage is maybe on, this is a really long shot, but on Ukraine, for instance, which China is still very much an ally of Russia, although it's very clear that it's sitting on the fence and it's being very fair and not taking one side or the other. I mean, that's obviously not the case. It's China has stepped in where the sanctions have bit into Russia's economy, and although it's not directly necessarily supplying arms and weapons, it's supplying masses and masses of dual-use technology for Russia as well. So I think the Europeans are also getting a bit antsy about this and saying, you could sort of sway things one way or one way or another, but I think it's not particularly in China's interest too. I mean, the Ukraine war is quite a good distraction from China for the US and for others. But I think this is another niggling annoyance that the EU it directly affects European security.
Robin, when Ursula von der Leyen, EC president, talks about an inflection point, and I don't get the impression that language sort of spontaneously descended upon her. That's clearly a workshopped phrase. What does she mean?
Well, I think what she means is the years and years of tolerance, as some of the European Union nations see it, of an unfair and a relationship that was imbalanced in terms of market access to mainland China for European Union companies, for European Union exporters and manufacturers, and the terms under which the Chinese government was supporting, its national team, so to speak, some of the biggest industrial players in its country, and they were able to manufacture and export back to the EU on very, very different terms. And I think that's sort of the root of this relationship, which many have felt. It's a similar complaint that's come from Donald Trump and before him those in the Biden administration in terms of the rules of the game, essentially, and the rules of the game that define the trade relationship in terms of market access, in terms of fairness, and in terms of support for those companies and their ability to export abroad. And that's what's at the very root of it. But I think the problem is the Chinese show absolutely no appetite and don't see themselves as being in a weakened position whereby they are willing to cede any ground ground when it comes to both supply chain and when it comes to these growing behemoths like BYD, their growing dominance in the EV and the battery and sustainable power sector.
Daniela, do we get any sense perhaps of a new confidence from the European Union, perhaps associated with the confidence it has had to find in the last year or so in terms of its relationship with the United States? It has had to start acting a bit more like a self-contained superpower rather than any kind of American dependent. Is it possible that they have carried something of this into their relationship with China?
Well, I would like to think so, but Europe has been very late in the game of organising itself and realising that it actually has to be responsible for its own security to a large extent. It has, I think you're right that it has sort of transformed its working in vis-a-vis Washington, but as Robin said, the task and the inequalities are just too unequal here. The trade deficit is vast, and the rules of the game are not in any way the same.
Well, to Rome now, which is today hosting the latest attempt to bring about an end to the war in Gaza. Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy of US President Donald Trump, will meet officials from Israel and Qatar in a bid to rescue the plan currently on the table. A 60-day ceasefire, a much-needed influx of aid to the Gaza Strip, and the release of some further Israeli hostages. Among the sticking points are Hamas's demand for a complete withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza and for a timeline for a permanent cessation of hostilities. While Hamas may not appear to have much of a negotiating position, Israel is under increasing pressure even from traditional allies, especially over the deaths of Palestinians queuing for what little aid there is in Gaza. According to the UN's World Food Programme, more than 1,000 people have been killed in these circumstances in the last couple of months. Robin, is there any reason to imagine these particular talks in Rome are going to get us anywhere?
Not as far as I can see, unfortunately, and the tragedy is, I think, domestically for the Netanyahu government, which still appears to teeter on the edge of its own kind of political survival. Public opinion seems to be fairly strongly behind the position of the Benjamin Netanyahu's government in terms of both its military tactics and I think its desire to continue to push into parts of Gaza and establish what for some is beginning to seem like a semi-permanent presence.
Daniela, is Israel, do you think, concerned at all by that escalating outrage from allies? We have seen that letter signed by several, actually a couple of dozen countries, many of which are normally thought of as Israel's traditional allies, not including the United States, obviously. But does that appear to have bothered Israel even in the slightest?
I think there is a real division within Israel about the attitudes to the war. I mean, overwhelmingly, the public want it to end. They want their war aims they support is they want a return of the hostages, and that's it, an end of. They're not. They don't really buy in anymore to this idea of destroying Hamas militarily, and so on and so forth. And there is this increasing awareness that Israel's image on the world stage is being hugely affected, including from its allies, an understanding that Donald Trump is not necessarily going to greenlight everything that Netanyahu wants. And also this idea that I think there is a very widespread view in Israel that Netanyahu, deeply unpopular as he is the cause of all these problems. However, the way that the coalition is set up, as long as he keeps the far right on side, then his government will continue for another year or more. The messages coming out from Israel is that ceasefire talks are looking more likely. They haven't withdrawn completely, although they sent their negotiators back home to discuss things more deeply. But the demands that the Israeli side are making, so as you said, so for the army not to withdraw as far as they did even the last round of the last ceasefire, seem to be coming very much from a right-wing bloc who have this idea of resettlement and taking over Gaza, and at the same time, then the annexation and settler violence in the West Bank is continuing.
And we did see the
apace.
Knesset passing that, albeit non-binding resolution this week, endorsing the idea of annexing the West Bank.
Yeah, these this is sort of, I think this is politics. These are political games that they're playing within the government to basically because to sort of throw a bone to the far right. For many Israelis, the idea that the settlements in the West Bank and Gaza belong to a different universe, really, and that's part of the problem. Is this has been allowed to go on for decades and decades and decades, and it seems to be something different, something other. And this idea that Israel can carry on as quite a good place to live for most of the people who live there, and have nothing to do with the occupation or the war in Gaza. I mean, Israelis, we've spoken about this before, the Israelis, the Israeli media has really let down the Israeli people by failing to report what's happening in Gaza. Obviously, the information is there, but you have to go out and find it. So I think there's a kind of binary reality. Netanyahu is not popular, but bizarrely enough, he's remarkably strong.
Robin, is there, with all due recognition that Benjamin Netanyahu has painted himself into this corner? Daniela talks about his desire and indeed need for his own purposes of staying, one, in power and two, out of jail, keeping his coalition together. Is there any way he can stop the war and do that?
Well, I think, as we've heard Daniela kind of articulate, that his continued existence politically relies on his continuing to be an exponent of that kind of ultimate military strategy, doesn't it? And the terms that have been laid down for some of these talks, many would say are unrealistic, are unobtainable, and therefore not a realistic negotiating position. And it's fair to assume from that the people laying those down know they're not realistic and intend to continue. But I think what appears at the moment, and domestic politics is very important, and it's difficult to kind of assess what you attach more currency, more value to in terms of the messages you hear coming out of Israel. But when the talk is of annexation and the talk is of a resettlement of millions of Palestinians in Gaza, and that begins to kind of be perceived as something that's potentially realistic, I think that tells you how much Benjamin Netanyahu believes that his the continuance of the war is the only option he has in terms of staying in power and retaining his control.
I mean, Daniel, I realise this is necessarily speculative, and we absolutely will not hold you to this, but is there... And it is amazing to think that we are now coming up, rapidly approaching the second anniversary of October 7th, 2023. And do we yet have even the vaguest idea of how this is going to end? Because at some point this war will end, all wars eventually do. But do we have even the least idea of what will happen next?
I think there are numerous scenarios that have been drawn up by different actors, just as we have numerous scenarios for how the occupation could end and how there could be a two-state solution, a one-state solution, a federation. I mean, this is all academic. But in this case, I think there is... if you look at that, people have these rather grand ideas as well. There's the idea of remaking the Middle East. I mean, when does that work? But okay. But the idea that's been floated around for a long time that the friendly Gulf states will help redevelop Gaza. The money is there. Israel has really resisted outside influence in this way, while. Sort of saying, but why doesn't the Arab world loves the Palestinians so much? Why don't they invest in their infrastructure? I think that's kind of that's one way forward. I mean, money there will be no lack of when it comes to reconstruction, but reconstruction of what? The longer term, there are various options, but in the short and medium term, what happens when there's a ceasefire? What happens if it's a long ceasefire? What happens when international journalists are allowed? Back in Gaza, what happens when the Gazans want to actually commemorate what has happened to them? What happens then? And from the getting to a sort of geopolitical solution, from where we are now, there can, people have been writing policy papers and drawing up accounts and working out the economics of it. But from on a human perspective, there is a huge gulf. And I think we're going to be talking about campus protests and US politics and how this plays out. And in many ways, the Palestinian issue has become just sort of a cipher for a much wider row that's going on, and that is not going to end. That has got, I think, decades left in it to run.
By way of pivoting us to that much wider row, Robin, which we will get to very shortly, is one of the difficulties with this situation that really the only outside actor that Israel actually cares about is the United States, and this US administration is perhaps uniquely uninterested in getting to grips with the Middle East?
Yeah, I think you're right in that analysis. But we also know, on the other hand, that Donald Trump would love to be a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and whatever you think about his transactional politics, he is a man who has the power and has the influence and has the desire in terms of a legacy to maybe secure something like that. And so he kind of waxes and wanes between being an America first, being on the borders of a new kind of isolationism, but at the same time, this is a president who's been very internationalist in many respects. Diplomatically, not so much in terms of resources and how American money is spent abroad, but in terms of his diplomatic largesse. I think he would find it irresistible to not be involved if he believed it was a change that he could genuinely affect.
Well, to the United States and the latest battle in the war that the administration of President Donald Trump seems determined to wage upon academia, a sector of the US economy which generates barely calculable billions annually. Perhaps even for this reason, Columbia University has become the latest institute of learning to decide that it's probably easiest in the long run to pay Trump off. Columbia has agreed to cough up $200 million and make various other concessions. Daniela, the alleged initial ostensible complaint here is that Columbia had been insufficiently vigilant against on-campus anti-Semitism. Do we buy the idea that this has been what has kept Donald Trump awake at nights?
I think there is a genuine issue here of freedom of speech and legitimate protest, and the fact that university students, wherever they are in the world, are not really great at judging the limits or being kind to the point of view of the other side. There have been some really ugly scenes, and not just in America, here as well. I think the right to protest is important. The imperative to protest about Gaza is also important, but the people who are protesting are not really interested in making a difference or winning or building a consensus. And that there has been anti-Semitism, undoubtedly, but the issue has also been weaponized by those who want to see this as part of the culture wars. And gosh, it works so well. It's just a perfect trope to be able to use. So I think the universities are taking moves such as adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which most European countries adopt. But when it comes to actually tackling the issue of freedom of speech, I think it's just been failed on all sides. The universities have not been brave enough to say, OK, these are the limits and we're going to stick to them. And there are many, many outside actors just trying to exploit what's going on campus. And it's just, as I said, it's just incredibly easy to do so. Well,
on that thought, Robin, if you are Columbia, which, and I looked it up, has an endowment of around $15 billion, why not say to Trump, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think what fascinates me as well is this... the education sector in the United States is not the same as the media industry there, but there are parallels we're seeing this week in terms of I think, decisions taken by CBS, previous legal settlements made by other news organisations, ABC News in particular, who have decided, similar to the tactical decision by those maybe at Columbia, to take the plea, essentially, to cough up and to not run the risk of pursuing a bigger, longer, more drawn out and possibly far more costlier legal proceeddings.
Although Harvard has, it's worth pointing out.
Yeah, some have, some haven't. What fascinates me is that I think it's deeply worrying, because it just speaks to a kind of a real politiques, so to speak. And let's remind ourselves, we're barely 6 months into the Trump administration, with Rubio and Vance looking both in a good position, maybe for a continued term. But what worries me is that it's evidence of such a kowtowing to an extent, and a willingness, just frankly, to not see a battle for values that are far deeper and are far more important. And I think those news organisations in particular, coming from the world that I previously came from, are undermining the work of the people that work for them and the history that they rest on.
But Daniela, for a man as Trump is, who often boasts of being, motivated and animated more or less exclusively by the bottom line, does the damage in terms of incoming funds that this is going to do, shouldn't it trouble him more than it does? Just in terms of foreign students alone, American universities generate enormous amounts of money. And there are already reports that not only are foreign students applying to American universities in smaller numbers than previously, there are record numbers of American students applying to universities in Europe.
Well, this is the great reshuffling, and all the cards will fall in in whatever way they do. I mean, if you're thinking about soft power, then the soft power of Harvard and Columbia and the American universities is incredible. I think if you have the capacity and the money and the ability to go there, I don't think people, on the whole, numbers might be wobbling, but the fact that there's some DEI issues there is not going to be the deterrent. The brand is there. Things may change in another 4 years. 6 years, but I think we're still at a point of view. Going to study in America is never going to be a budget option, is it? But we've seen the same thing in this country as well. We make a lot of money over foreign students, and we've taken lots of measures which it seems has to put them off, which doesn't make any sense. But it's about domestic politics as well as the economy. And like with Brexit, if you have a policy and you have an ideology, you're going to say, well, actually, we're going to end up better. We're going to end up with more money and more students. That's worth sort of pressing forward for whatever sort of political points you're going to score.
Well, to Silicon Valley and the latest big idea to emanate therefrom, which seems likely to make life for everyone else just that little bit worse. In minor fairness to our weirdo tech overlords, they have lifted this deeply tedious notion from China. It is this, the so-called 996 work regimen, which is to say a working week of 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week for a total of 72 hours. It is reported that job applicants to various AI startups are being asked to either express enthusiasm for this or see themselves out. Robin, if we assume that this is starting at 9 a.m. on Monday, how good a job do you reckon you're doing between 6 and 9 p.m. on the Saturday?
Well, I've been to places, down south and doing stories in my past in China where the 996 culture is alive and well. There are fold-up beds by the desk. People are taking sleeps during the day. They're working late. The expectation is that work takes over your whole life. And it's part of the broader kind of culture in China of the last 20, 30 years of we're a country which has a huge work ethic anyway, and business is expected to operate, constantly. But it's the break it, it's the smash it, it's the create quickly, and that culture of work, which is different, frankly, to the European culture of work, and the attitudes are very different. But it's brutal, and we're seeing in the last couple of years, post-COVID in particular, the rise rise of what's known as pingtang, which is the lying flat. This whole culture in a country of China where youth unemployment is increasingly high, many people deciding not to have children, of lying flat, and that's a real reaction to those decades of the 996 expectations.
The AI companies and Silicon Valley startups, Daniela, are at least, I'm sure, paying very decent money for top talent, and they're also offering things like, meals will be provided 3 a day while you plough through your 12-hour day. If that was on offer to you, would you be enthused by the prospect?
Would the meals be siphoned into the corner of my mouth by a special straw? Would somebody else do all the childcare while I did that? Because that's the real 24/799.
There is that. But okay, let's assume that you are getting paid Silicon Valley money, that the childcare is taken care of, and somebody is bringing 3 reasonably pleasant meals to your desk a day.
No. No, and it doesn't make. It doesn't make any sense in any kind of sustainable way. And first of all, I thought AI was supposed to all put us out of a job, not make us work harder. And also, to me, it's just redolent of that whole sort of tech bro, raw dogging, biohacking.
See, this is what I think. I think this is nerds trying to appear macho.
Right? It's giving a cute acronym to working really, really hard. We've all done those kinds of jobs, and we've all worked very hard. I remember working at actual print paper that actually went out print, and so we'd do on print day, we'd stay there till 3 a.m. So it was a really, really long day, but. The modern world, certainly not the Europeans. Can you imagine the Spanish or the French giving up the sort of 2-hour lunches? It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And I can't imagine it will catch on. As Robin says, you really have to have that kind of work ethic, that culture bit in. God knows the Europeans don't. And even, where you have that kind of work ethic built into your culture, people will want to actually have children and carry on with their lives. And I say no. Not for me, not for anyone.
Robin, the thing is, I'm sure I speak for all of us, at least this far, that if you are a journalist, as we are, at some point in your life, you are going to work at least 1 week where you do pile up those kinds of hours just because things are going nuts that you're trying to cover, or you're trying to do a million things at once. Or if you're a freelancer, you're having one of those weeks where you haven't worked for a month and you feel like you'll never work again. And then everybody on earth says, I want 800 words by Wednesday afternoon. We've all been there. But Robin, you having seen this up close, the 996 lifestyle, was there any part of you that sort of took this in and thought, wow, this looks amazing?
No, not at all. Because I found it quite sad in some ways. Look, if it's your company, if it's your startup, if there's a group of 20 of you and you have your equity share and it's your lifelong dream, then you're invested in the project. Sure. And I think we can all begin to understand you might buy in more to that culture. But when it's something that's being imposed on you, and look, we're seeing as well in China now some of the reactions to it, which is where actually lots of particularly younger professional women are deciding they don't want to have children. They don't want to go and work the 996 either. But they're deciding that they don't want to have children. They want to focus more on themselves, the costs of childcare, and also that's also a rejection of the authoritarian demands made of them before. But it's also in a country which has 1.4 billion people, where the battle for good jobs means you can sometimes, force people to compete in a much more brutal way against each other than maybe in this country, where clearly there are far, far fewer people you just wouldn't simply be able to do.
Robin Brandt and Daniela Peled, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's Daily, our weekly letter from is postmarked Washington, D.C.
It was pure happenstance that led me to be standing in the blazing sun on Washington's National Mall, trying to edge into the tiniest patch of shade while watching grown men and women stuff dozens of soda-soaked hot dogs into their mouths. Our local radio station holds a daily competition in which listeners must guess a song played backwards, and it had become a daily ritual for me and my kids on the car ride home from school. One day, we got it right, winning tickets to the 33rd Annual Barbecue Battle, a massive open-air celebration of all things meat and grilling in the shadow of the US Capitol building. Which is how I ended up at one of their stages watching a qualifying round for Nathan's famous hot dog eating contest, an annual July 4th tradition that takes place on Coney Island as competitive eaters from all over the world converge for a televised spectacle of gluttony.
Okay, load, love them and leave them, smoke them if you got them, see on the other side. Time. Count it down with me from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
I could barely keep my own lunch down as I watched James Webb, a trim professional eater from Australia, consume 48 hot dogs and buns in 10 minutes to secure his spot in the final. But the hot dog eating contest wasn't the only American cultural phenomenon on show that day. More striking to me was the bonanza of free stuff that sent attendees into a frenzy on that hot June afternoon. Even as President Donald Trump tests the limits of the Constitution with audacious executive orders and the furore over the Jeffrey Epstein files continues to dominate headlines, polls consistently show that it is the cost of living and the economy that remain the top concerns for Americans today. Consumer prices are on average 24% higher than they were in 2020, and Trump won the election last year largely on the back of promises to make life more affordable for everyday Americans.
My very highest priorities is to rescue our economy and get dramatic and immediate relief to working families. As president, I'm fighting every day to reverse this damage and make America affordable again.
Despite his campaign promises, prices remain stubbornly high. Inflation is at 2.4%, and economists worry that Trump's trade tariffs will send that figure even higher.
We have won from Maspeth to Chinatown. We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford.
In New York last month, left-wing Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani cruised to a surprise victory in the Democratic primary for New York mayor, with a campaign focused on bringing down the cost of living in the Big Apple. And bargain hunting is in no way the prevail of lower socioeconomic groups. At every social gathering I attend, no matter what the earning powers of its attendees, a key topic of conversation will be how to find food that is edible and affordable, which wholesaler gives the best deals, how to get money off at different retailers. It has taken me 2 years of living in America to finally realise that life is only affordable if you devote a significant amount of your time to navigating the web of loyalty cards, coupons and cashback deals. It's inevitably a deal with the devil and means handing over all my personal and shopping data to be mined for more things to me to sell, but I've given in. I'm embracing it. I felt a glow of pride recently when a supermarket cashier lavished praise on me for shaving $56 off a grocery bill using points and coupons. Back at the barbecue battle, thousands of people had queued without shade during a heat wave to pay $20 to get into an event where a huge array of goods were up for grabs. People slung huge shopping bags over their shoulders. The more enterprising folks brought in wheeled shopping carts. Into those receptacles went the myriad free items that brands were giving away. Some were barbecue-related. Meat spices, rubs, chili-infused honey. But there was also toothpaste, washing-up liquid, polyester socks, and every kind of soft drink imaginable. You could interpret it as an orgy of American consumerism and advertising. But I felt it cut deeper than that. People genuinely needed many of these items, and calculated this was one way to get them at a lower cost. As for me and my family, we came home with about 8 toothbrushes, a pineapple teriyaki barbecue rub, and 6 miniature bottles of pickle juice. Inspired by the hot dog guzzlers, we put the latter to use in our own competitive eating contest, seeing which one of us could chug a whole bottle of pickle juice in one go.
10, 9, 8, 7.
Finally, I felt close to cultural assimilation.
2, 1, chug, 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 chug.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was Charlotte MacDonald Gibson writing to us from Washington, D.C. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Daniela Peled and Robin Brandt. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Henry King. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.